Now we're going to look at the appearance of the Montana Common Core standards. The Common Core State Standards gives us language that is very explicit of the descriptions of what students should need to know and be able to do. This leads to a conceptual understanding of not simply the skills that need to increase as our expectations for college and career readiness are increased, but this also provides us with expectations of the knowledge and skills students should need to have for science, technology, engineering, along with mathematics to be globally competitive citizens. These differences create a critical need for professional development and a well-planned implementation for these standards. Here's a quick glance of our prior terminologies, so those old Montana standard definitions versus our 2011 adopted Common Core standards. Here is a broad overview of the appearance of the English Language Arts Common Core state standards. And so our Montana document actually looks a little bit different than this, but for tutorial purposes, we're just going to use this screen capture here to illustrate where strands occur, where grade occurs, where the College and Career Ready standard occurs, and then specifically what standard is being addressed. So how would we actually read this document? So here we can see that we're looking at reading standards for literature, and the grade we're specifically addressing here would be for kindergartners. If we want to see some of the college and career ready statements, those fall under key ideas and details, as also craft and structure. If we're specifically trying to address the literary kindergarten 5th grade standard, then what we're referencing is this standard here. So we would, if we were to find this in our Montana Common Core standard document, we would need to look under the reading standards for literature, and then we would need to look under kindergarten, and then we would also need to look under craft and structure, and specifically at this standard here, which is recognize common types of text, for instance, storybooks and poems. Here is an overview going back to the passage deconstruction sheet or variable sheet that we will be using for this course versus what we see for the Montana Common Core standards. So how might we pull in some of that information that we just covered? If we're looking at what sort of text type, is this a literary passage or is this an informational passage, we would want to look under that strand. Next, if we're looking at the grade, as we were looking with the kindergarten, we would be talking about, for the purposes of this example, the 8th grade students. So this item may be more appropriately aligned to 8th grade. Also for the strand, we're looking at the literature, so we would pull in the RL. If we're looking at the College and Career Ready standard, if we go back to that craft and structure example for the 5th standard, here we would pull in that it is most appropriately aligned to the craft and structure College and Career Ready standard. Now specifically the standard being addressed, let's say we're looking at RL 8.2, then we would be looking here under Key Ideas and Details standard, which is determine a theme or a central idea of text and analyze its development over the course of the text, including its relationship to the character, setting, and plot. Provide an objective summary of the text. So what are the standards? Standards simply are what students should know and be able to do. Assessments allow us to target our effectiveness on achieving these expectations. The term standard in education is often used to describe specifically what students should know and be able to do within content areas. NAEP does not use the term standards to indicate what students should know and be able to do. However, in order to develop the assessment, they had to identify similar levels of description. So in NAEP they call them content expectations. When we're talking about the Montana Common Core state standards, we'll reference standards. These terms should be used interchangeably for the purpose of this course. So why are we using NAEP and not the Smarter Balanced Assessment? One of the lead writers for the Common Core State Standards for the English Language Arts was Susan Pimentel. She also serves as the National Assessments Governing Board member, also oversees the NAEP assessment, and in their development process for the Common Core State Standards it was noted that some of the development and key considerations for the Common Core were written with NAEP playing a very important role in the standard development process. Additionally, for our purposes, we need to have considerable evidence and practice with these items. The Smarter Balance Assessment was piloted in 2014, with full implementation being in the spring of 2015. Because of the newness of the Smarter Balance Assessment, there is limited access to the release/practice questions that we can freely use for our instructional depth within this course. Also, NAEP provides us with performance evidence, so in other words, student outcomes of how Montana students have performed on these items. Here are some of the key design considerations that were used when developing the Common Core state standards. So the Common Core state standards, they needed to align with the best evidence on college and career ready expectations. That was developed in the summer of 2009. They also needed to build on the best work of the states, so the state-led aspect was coordinated by the NGA and the CCSSO. Multiple rounds of feedback from states, teachers, researchers, higher education, and the general public were given. Benchmark standards internationally were used to inform the design of the Common Core state standards. The main focus needed to be on what matters for college and career readiness. The standards needed to include rigorous content and application of the knowledge through higher order skills. You can see this referenced in our Montana Common Core state standards on pages 4 through 6. Some of the evidence and research base that was used to inform the writing of the Common Core state standards included the scholarly research that was out there, surveys on what skills are required of students entering college and workforce training programs, for instance, the ability to argue from evidence and to read informational texts, assessment data identifying college and career readiness performance. So what sort of text complexities need to be considered, what sort of evidence needs to be elucidated, comparisons to standards from NAEP and high-performing states and countries such as Ireland, Finland, New Zealand, Singapore, and Canada were included in the writing of the Common Core state standards. So specifically looking at the evidence base, most of the required reading in college and workforce training programs is informational in structure and challenging in content. Therefore, there needed to be a growing emphasis on the informational texts in the higher grades, because in the ELA classroom, they must focus on literature as well as literary nonfiction, and a great deal of informational reading in the grades 6 through 12 must take place. Standards are not alone in calling for special emphasis on informational text. The 2009 reading framework from NAEP shows that we need to place a high and increasing proportion of informational text on assessment as students advance through the grades. To measure students' growth toward college and career readiness, assessments aligned to the standard should adhere to the distribution of text across grades cited in the NAEP framework. Therefore, the standard should be consistent with NAEP, whereas an overwhelming focus of writing throughout high school should be on arguments and informative/explanatory text.